Hello everybody, I am Jonathan Seal. In this video, I'm going to talk about the API web service testing micro-credentials. To understand why API testing is valuable to any tester's career, we should first look at the testing triangle or test pyramid. Here we have a diagram of the testing pyramid. Let's look at the testing pyramid from the bottom layer to the top layer. In the lowest layer, we have the unit tests. We would expect, for quality, that unit tests would cover a high proportion of the code base and can be run quickly. However, unit tests may be a bit granular for covering business-level requirements. Unit tests may run after the build but before deployment, meaning that the code is built but not yet running as a service or in a process. Hence, let's move on to the service layer. The service layer is where API services might reside. The service layer might be the first layer that business requirements, or at least partial business requirements, are covered by tests. The service layer tests may take longer than unit tests, but take less time to run than UI tests. Also, service layer tests may have some instability, but again, they should be much more stable than UI tests, so they're less flaky. Service layer tests would likely run after deployment, meaning that the service is running. Also, third parties might use the service layer without using the UI layer. UI tests are slowest, and they might be flaky, and they might require more maintenance than layers below the UI layer type of testing. All three layers have a place in testing approach, but without testing the service layer, most projects are missing an important part of the testing. Let's have a look at three different API related subjects that may help you, the tester. There are event streaming technologies such as Azure Service Bus or Apache Kafka. An event streaming technology might be applied to a sports tournament digital solution where each score change is considered an event. Also, a periodic event, such as a meter reading on an Internet of Things device, might require event streaming. Understanding APIs is fundamental to understanding streaming services. You may have heard of microservices, where there are many APIs running in a large complex solution. Hence, you first need to have a foundational understanding of APIs to understand microservices. In addition, APIs might be used to perform pre-test or post-test functions such as test data management. For example, APIs might be used to create, read, update, or delete test data. Test data management is often much faster if done from API calls instead of using UI scripts for the same function. Let's evaluate what micro-credentials you can pursue. There are three micro-credentials you can obtain. The first is the Web Service API Introduction, where we will go over what a Web Service API is and the test planning and design. In this micro-credential, the objective is to give you quite a high-level understanding of what API testing is and what you need to think of before getting started. The second micro-credential goes over REST API, gRPC, and GraphQL. The majority of the industry currently use REST APIs, and REST APIs are a good foundation for understanding GraphQL. So the micro-credential will focus mainly on REST. The last micro-credential goes over environmental considerations, API test tools, and the future-proofing from a test perspective. To give you a bit more detail on the first micro-credential, we have the following. What is a web service API? What are the expectations of an API tester? What are the challenges an API tester face? What are the API requirements specific to API testing? What are the functions and attributes you need to consider when doing API testing? How do I identify and assess risk when doing API testing? How do I determine the coverage goals you want to achieve with API testing? How do I determine testing approach when doing API testing? How do I identify the test conditions and set scopes for the testing effort? We will also go over regression testing for API testing. For the second micro-credential, we have the following items. We will discuss REST API from an introduction standpoint. We discuss about the function and non-functional testing that you should perform or should look at when doing REST API testing. We will discuss gRPC and GraphQL as an introduction. And finally, we will spend a little bit of time talking about gRPC and GraphQL independently. And for the third micro-credential, we will go over the items as follows. We will look at some API test tools that you may use when doing your testing. We discuss different test environments and considerations around testing in different environments. We highlight performance tools and what kind of support some of those tools may have. We also talk about test automation and talk about how to expect rapid growth in the API space, as APIs do tend to grow quickly. So why pursue the micro-credentials? Web service APIs have been around for some time now. The ability to test APIs will help your test portfolio. APIs are only getting more and more prevalent in the industry. As we have discussed earlier in this video, understanding APIs can add value such as test data management. This is in addition to test API testing. So we want to give you, via this micro-credentials, a solid foundation and a good basis for API testing. These micro-credentials are not intended to replace other testing coursework or certification. It should also be noted that API technology is evolving at a rapid pace, so different tools and approaches will evolve over time. Yet, we suspect that the foundational knowledge you obtain in these micro-credentials might benefit your testing knowledge long term. In conclusion, these micro-credentials are designed to be a practical approach for the practical tester. So are these micro-credentials for you? Ask yourself the following questions. Are you now or are you going to be working on a microservice or a web service API project? Have you been on an API testing project but you did not know what to do? Are you working on an API project now, but you have a sense that the current test coverage is lacking in places? Have you been working on API testing, perhaps using some API testing tools, but you didn't really understand what was happening? If you answered yes to one or more of these questions, these micro-credentials will help you understand what is happening at a level that should help you with your work. An intended outcome of these micro-credentials is to build an API testing foundation. API testing can be both fun and challenging depending on the architecture and size of the project. We hope that you pursue the micro-credentials so you can add API testing as another tool in your testing toolbox. Thank you for watching.